I'm 75 now, and I honestly can't remember a time when anyone but the Queen was at the center of it all. Like many royal controversies, this one began quietly, rumors whispered in palace corridors, a strange absence at Balmoral, guarded conversations in Windsor, and a noticeable shift in the tone of the Queen's closest aides. But what followed turned into the most explosive royal drama since the days of Princess Diana. In the months following Queen Elizabeth II's passing, the public believed everything had been settled. Her will, released with all the traditional ceremony, appeared to divide her personal belongings and royal assets in a way that upheld tradition. But according to insiders, that version of the will wasn't the whole story. It was carefully crafted to avoid disruption. Multiple high-level sources now claim that another document existed, a separate, legally binding will that changed everything. This confidential directive reportedly bypassed Queen Camilla and handed the bulk of the Queen's private royal estate to Catherine, the Princess of Wales. And if true, the implications go far beyond jewelry or keepsakes. This private will allegedly transferred not just personal items, but also significant titles, estates, and even select royal duties to Kate, indicating that Elizabeth may have seen her as the future face of the monarchy. Camilla, now queen consort, was intentionally left out. Those close to the situation say this was no oversight. It was a strategic and symbolic move. When word of the hidden will spread among the inner circle, chaos erupted. Staff were rushed into crisis mode. Legal teams were called in under strict secrecy. But the fallout couldn't be contained. Camilla's reaction, according to those with knowledge of the events, was immediate and intense. Behind closed doors, she is said to have erupted in fury, accusing the late Queen of orchestrating a posthumous betrayal and even lashing out at King Charles in the process. One royal advisor described her as inconsolable and enraged. Meanwhile, Kate was pulled from the spotlight. Her team was instructed to remain calm and composed, despite the growing storm around them. Amid the chaos, a clearer truth slowly surfaced. Queen Elizabeth had never fully embraced Camilla as a rightful successor. She respected tradition, but she placed her trust elsewhere, with Kate. And in what may have been her most influential final decision, the Queen didn't make a grand announcement or public statement. Instead, she shifted the future of the monarchy with a quiet signature. No one expected such a revelation, and its consequences are still unfolding. To truly understand the weight of Elizabeth's final decision, and the fury it ignited, you have to look at the bond she shared with the woman who would eventually marry her grandson. Long before Catherine became the Princess of Wales, before the grand wedding and the global spotlight, the Queen had taken a personal interest in her. But before we continue, we'd love for you to hit the subscribe button if you're enjoying this video. If you just did, we truly appreciate it. Now, let's get back to the main content. Their relationship wasn't flashy. It wasn't something the public saw. But behind palace walls, those close to them noticed something genuine. From their earliest private meetings, Queen Elizabeth seemed quietly drawn to Kate. Unlike others who had entered the royal fold seeking status or influence, Catherine brought a different energy entirely. She was graceful under pressure, intelligent, and, perhaps most important to the Queen, extremely private. While some sought fame or media attention, Kate seemed content to avoid the spotlight. Where other royal spouses had clashed with the press or courted controversy, she remained composed and respectful. One former palace staffer recalled that after their second private tea, the Queen confided, "She understands what this life really asks of you, and she handles it with grace." That kind of praise was rare coming from the Queen, who was famously restrained in her emotions. Elizabeth had always been cautious about who joined the royal family. The heartbreak surrounding Diana, and later the turbulent fallout with Meghan and Harry, only deepened her concerns. But Kate was different. Over time, the Queen began to entrust her with more roles, discreetly. She invited Kate to attend events typically reserved for senior royals, and in private, she offered something even more rare: personal guidance. Palace sources speak of handwritten notes from the Queen to Kate, filled with encouragement, wisdom, and the occasional warning. One letter, reportedly written after the birth of Princess Charlotte, praised Kate's strength and called her the kind of mother the monarchy would one day be grateful for. Expressions like that didn't come easily from Elizabeth, but for Kate, she made an exception. There were also symbolic gestures. For their 10th wedding anniversary, Kate was said to have received a diamond brooch that once belonged to Queen Mary, a piece never worn by Camilla or even Princess Anne. The gift wasn't about its material value. It carried meaning. Many saw it as the Queen's subtle way of saying, "You're not just a royal by marriage, you're part of the institution's future." As time passed, Elizabeth and Kate developed a quiet understanding. Both shared a deep sense of duty, and perhaps more importantly, a willingness to make sacrifices without complaint. When William was away on official trips or serving as a pilot, Kate often brought George and Charlotte to visit Windsor, not for appearances, but for real moments of connection. In those quiet gestures and rare confidences, the Queen was leaving clues. And now, in the aftermath of her passing, it seems those moments meant far more than anyone realized. The Queen, known for her stern demeanor and emotional distance, especially with her own children, was said to show a softer side when around her great-grandchildren. And it was Kate who made that possible. In contrast, Camilla's relationship with the Queen remained strained, weighed down by years of complicated history. While Queen Elizabeth eventually offered public acceptance of Camilla after decades of scandal, those within the palace knew the sentiment was more performative than heartfelt. Privately, the Queen confided in close friends that Charles's marriage to Camilla had, in her view, weakened the crown's moral standing. She acknowledged the choice, but she never truly embraced it. So when the time came to consider her legacy, not just in terms of property and titles, but in terms of values and representation, she faced a crucial decision. Who embodied the ideals she had devoted her reign to protecting? Who could carry the crown's dignity into the future with grace and credibility? For Elizabeth, that person wasn't Camilla, it was Catherine. What began as quiet admiration for Kate had, over the years, grown into a deep sense of conviction. By the time the Queen was finalizing her private affairs, that feeling had transformed into decisive action. Kate wasn't just liked, she was trusted. And in the royal family, trust is rare and deeply significant. For decades, people had speculated about what Queen Elizabeth would pass down, not just publicly but privately. The sovereign had access to personal wealth, heirlooms, and powerful symbols of royal continuity that weren't part of any official record. The will made public after her death in 2022 was formal and predictable. It followed protocol. But behind closed doors, another version was being quietly discussed among those closest to her. Sources inside the palace have claimed that in her final months, the Queen oversaw the creation of a second private will, shared only with a select group of trusted staff. Unlike the public version, this private document was said to be an unfiltered reflection of her true intentions, free from political expectations or palace diplomacy, and its contents, according to those in the know, were nothing short of shocking. Camilla was noticeably left out of many of the Queen's most treasured personal effects. Instead, Catherine was named the recipient of several key items, pieces that had been long assumed to be destined for the Queen consort. Among them were jewels from the Queen Mother's personal trove and, reportedly, access to the historic Delhi Durbar tiara, a royal masterpiece once worn by Queen Mary, and almost never seen in recent times. But the inheritance extended far beyond jewelry. In a revelation that stunned even seasoned royal insiders, the Queen's beloved Sandringham summer villa, considered one of her most cherished retreats, was not left to Charles or Princess Anne, as many had expected. Instead, it was gifted to William and Kate, along with a personal note requesting that it remain a place of refuge for the next generation of the Windsor family. This hidden legacy didn't just reflect the Queen's private sentiments. It made a bold statement about the future of the monarchy and who she believed was best equipped to lead it with honor. What caused the most stir wasn't the jewelry, the estates, or even the titles. It was the rumored existence of a private cache of personal letters and handwritten journals. Allegedly left entirely to Catherine, these writings could offer an intimate window into Queen Elizabeth's private thoughts throughout her reign. That they were entrusted to Kate, rather than Charles or even Princess Anne, struck many within the palace as something much more than inheritance. To some, it was a quiet coronation of sorts. A former senior aide claimed the Queen's final will had been sealed inside a private royal vault, accessible only to individuals with the highest level of clearance. Those reportedly included Charles and Anne, but notably, not Camilla. When Charles reviewed the contents during a confidential legal briefing, insiders say he was rattled. He tried to maintain composure, but the omission of Camilla from so many key bequests left him visibly shaken. To many in the royal circle, this wasn't just a case of favoritism. It was a statement. Though Camilla wore the title, it was Catherine whom the Queen had truly anointed with her trust and legacy. The fallout was immediate and intense. Legally, the will was airtight. The Queen had taken every step to ensure her final intentions were protected from challenge. Since it involved private property and personal belongings, there was virtually no avenue for a formal dispute. That made it all the more painful. For Camilla, what cut the deepest wasn't what was given, it was what wasn't. There was no personal letter, no token of remembrance, no symbolic acknowledgement. For someone who had clawed her way into public acceptance and royal legitimacy, the Queen's silence was staggering. What followed shook the palace in ways few had ever seen. Staff who were present that night say the mood inside Clarence House turned dark, fast. The Queen's message had landed, and Camilla was livid. Although the details were meant to remain behind closed doors, word quickly leaked from shaken insiders. What unfolded was a level of emotional volatility that even the most seasoned royal staff were unprepared for. Sources say Camilla first heard the full details from Charles himself, shortly after his confidential legal meeting. She hadn't been officially briefed. He told her directly. And that's when everything fell apart. The reaction was instant. She screamed so loudly that people across the residence heard it. One longtime staffer said, "It wasn't shock, it was betrayal." And she didn't try to hide it. Camilla had endured years of public scrutiny, criticism, and personal sacrifice to secure her place as queen consort. To be left out of the Queen's final will felt like the ultimate rejection. It wasn't just a loss, it was a message, one that said, "You'll never be her." Eyewitnesses described her pacing furiously for nearly an hour, flinging questions at anyone who entered the room. "Was this always her plan?" she reportedly shouted. "She smiled at me, then handed it all to the girl behind my back." That girl, of course, was Kate. Camilla then turned her fury on Charles, accusing him of letting it happen. "You knew how she felt about me," she yelled. "You stood by and let her cut me out." At one point, she hurled a glass against the wall, shattering it in front of stunned staff. Even Charles, long used to her temper, was said to be at a loss for words. And behind all the shouting and broken glass, one chilling truth echoed through the halls. The Queen had made her choice. And it wasn't Camilla. It was Kate. This wasn't just about jewels or estates. What truly shattered Camilla was the symbolism, the emotional weight behind being left out. That the Queen had entrusted Kate with cherished heirlooms, memories, and personal reflections, while giving Camilla nothing, not even a mention, was a painful confirmation of something Camilla had feared for years. She had been accepted, but never embraced, A palace footman who happened to overhear the chaos in the hallway recalled Camilla's voice breaking as she cried, "I was never good enough for her. No matter what I did, it was never enough." It was a rare and raw moment from someone the public knew as poised, composed, and in control. This wasn't anger, it was heartbreak. For Camilla, it was the realization of her worst fear. Staff were immediately instructed to stay silent. Phones were collected. Schedules were cleared. The next day, an official statement said Camilla was resting with the flu, but behind palace doors, the truth was very different. In the days that followed, Camilla reportedly told her top aides to explore whether the will could be contested. Lawyers were quietly contacted, but royal advisors urged her to drop it, reminding her that the will only involved the Queen's private belongings, and the legal window for a challenge was closed. But Camilla wasn't ready to let go. Those around her noticed a sharp change. Publicly, she kept up appearances, smiling politely, waving briefly. But inside the palace, her demeanor shifted. She became irritable, angry, and unpredictable. Staff treaded carefully. Even Charles, usually her most loyal defender, began spending long hours alone, walking through the gardens in silence. Kate, meanwhile, was asked to keep a low profile. Though she hadn't caused the Queen's decision, she had become the unwilling center of Camilla's resentment, a resentment that grew stronger by the day. And as palace officials scrambled to prevent the situation from spilling further into public view, it became clear that this was no longer just a family matter. Camilla had declared war, and not just within palace walls. While Clarence House was tense and volatile, the mood at Adelaide Cottage, where William and Kate lived, was quieter but no less heavy. The Queen's private will hadn't just stirred controversy. It had laid a heavy burden on two people who hadn't asked for it. William was deeply affected. Upon learning the full contents of the will, those close to him said he spent hours sitting silently, taking it all in. Not because he disagreed with what the Queen had done, but because he understood the weight of it. In a family where emotions are rarely spoken aloud, this was as clear a message as one could receive. According to one aide, William confided, "This isn't about diamonds. This is Gran showing the world who she believed in." For Kate, the impact was even more emotional. She had never involved herself in royal politics or palace power plays. She'd avoided controversy, stayed out of headlines when possible, and now she was at the heart of the biggest royal storm since Diana, entirely by accident. Sources say she was visibly shaken when William gently shared a handwritten letter that had been sealed with the will. While the exact contents remain private, those who've seen it describe it as deeply personal, warm, almost like a note from a mother. In it, the Queen is said to have praised Kate for her loyalty, grace, and quiet resilience. She wrote of her confidence that if the monarchy were to follow Kate's example, it would be in safe hands. After reading the letter, Kate reportedly broke down in tears, not out of pride, but because of the emotional weight it carried. She understood the message, and she also understood what it would mean for Camilla. Though she was never close to the Queen Consort, Kate had never wanted to take anything from her. She never sought this conflict. "She never wanted this fight," a longtime aide said quietly. "But now it's hers, whether she asked for it or not." Despite the immense pressure, William and Catherine handled the situation with quiet composure. There were no public statements, no anonymous leaks, no passive-aggressive messages slipped through the media. Instead, they stepped away from public appearances for several days. Time, it seemed, to reflect on the Queen's final words and to brace for the reaction that was sure to come, both from the public and from within the palace walls, particularly from Charles and Camilla. But even in silence, their influence began to grow. Subtle shifts were noticed behind the scenes. Palace staff started to observe a quiet reorientation of royal planning. Engagements that had once centered around Charles and Camilla were now being redirected toward William and Kate. Senior advisors began preparing Catherine for initiatives traditionally reserved for a queen consort, briefings on global humanitarian work, diplomatic protocol, and upcoming Commonwealth tours. Public sentiment shifted too. Polling data showed a noticeable spike in support for Catherine. Social media lit up with admiration. Many drew comparisons between her grace under pressure and the late Queen Elizabeth's lifelong poise. One viral post put it simply, "She never asked to be queen, but she already is." Inside the palace, there was a change in tone. It wasn't an official transfer of power, but something more nuanced. And in the monarchy, symbolism holds tremendous weight. Catherine never set her sights on the crown. But through the Queen's deliberate final act and the public's overwhelming embrace, she now carried its weight. And through it all, William remained solidly by her side, calm, unwavering, and deeply protective. Whatever came next, one truth had already settled in. Catherine wasn't just part of the Queen's legacy, she was the legacy. The British monarchy has long mastered the art of managing internal crises. For nearly 1,000 years, it has relied on secrecy, timing, and control to contain scandal before it reaches the public. But nothing had ever tested that system like the fallout from the Queen's hidden will. As tensions inside Clarence House reached their peak, the institution responded with its most trusted strategy, a coordinated internal lockdown. Within 48 hours of Camilla's breakdown, a confidential meeting was held. Senior aides from Buckingham Palace, Clarence House, and Kensington Palace gathered behind closed doors. There were no formal notes, no media presence. The goal was simple: contain the damage, protect the crown, and erase the will from public memory. The first step was silence. Any staff who had been exposed to the Queen's private document were presented with sweeping confidentiality agreements, far stricter than anything they had previously signed. Long-serving palace employees were reassigned. Others were quietly let go. The Queen's personal legal team, who had overseen the creation and execution of the private will, suddenly vanished from the public eye. One member was rumored to have been transferred to a post abroad. Then came narrative control. The palace's communications office crafted an alternative storyline. Camilla, they said, was under the weather. Nothing serious, just exhaustion. William and Catherine's absence from public duties? It was explained away as a family break timed with school holidays. Meanwhile, the Queen's assets, according to official filings, were distributed exactly as expected. Everything looked orderly and traditional. But beneath the surface, the cleanup was anything but smooth. Princess Anne, typically unfazed by palace drama, was said to be deeply uneasy. According to palace insiders, she had been shown the Queen's private will in the weeks leading up to the funeral. And what she saw had clearly left a mark. Although Princess Anne initially respected the will's private nature, it was Camilla's furious response and the effort to bury the truth that unsettled her. "She values duty over drama," a royal historian explained. But this wasn't about spectacle. It was about integrity. Charles, meanwhile, remained mostly silent. Some close to the situation said he was torn, caught between honoring his mother's final wishes and trying to support a wife unraveling under the weight of exclusion. Others claimed he was more involved than he appeared, even going so far as to instruct legal advisors to ensure the Queen's private will never reached public view. At Kensington Palace, William and Catherine were reportedly instructed to keep quiet, even with their closest aides. The message was clear: carry on as if nothing had changed. But behind the scenes, the atmosphere was tense. Catherine maintained her public poise, but the burden was real. It wasn't about wearing a crown. It was about carrying the truth she couldn't speak aloud. Gradually, the silence began to crack. Nothing made headlines, and no formal leaks hit the press, but small signals emerged. Hushed tips to journalists, subtle changes in the royal calendar. A particular tiara, long associated with the Queen Mother, noticeably missing from public records. The media, long wary of crossing the palace, largely stayed quiet. One outlet published a speculative piece titled, "Was Kate Always the Chosen One?" but it vanished within hours, reportedly pulled after a firm call from a senior palace representative. Despite every effort to contain it, the truth had already begun to slip out. Queen Elizabeth's final decision wasn't just a private matter. It was an undeniable turning point. The public might never read that hidden will, but inside the palace, and among those who truly understood the monarchy, everything had changed. Her choice didn't rely on announcements or ceremony. It wasn't about wealth or titles. It was about trust, an intimate, final act of confidence placed in Catherine. And that trust was stronger than any crown. Throughout her reign, the Queen had endured war, family rifts, public scandal, and private grief. She lived through Diana's death, Prince Andrew's disgrace, and the fallout with Harry and Meghan. But through it all, she held the monarchy steady. In her final years, she saw in Catherine the same steadiness, graceful, composed, and deeply loyal. Catherine never pursued power, but she proved, time and again, that she could shoulder it. And now, even as palace tradition continues and Camilla retains her formal title, the shift is undeniable. Catherine walks into royal engagements with quiet strength, not because she has to, but because people want to see her. Within the royal household, her influence is growing, not loudly, not formally, but undeniably. And Camilla, despite remaining queen consort, has been noticeably absent from key events. Her public appearances have dwindled. Her role is quietly shrinking. The Queen's final message didn't come with trumpets or proclamations. It came with a signature and a sealed letter, an unmistakable transfer of faith from one woman to another. A legacy passed not with ceremony, but with certainty. Catherine wasn't merely welcomed into the monarchy. She was chosen by the only woman whose approval could never be challenged.